Hello, everyone. Is this on? Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third panel of our series, Dialing In, 30 Years of 2SLGBTQ plus Activism in celebration of LGBT YouthLine's 30th anniversary. My name is Sierra. I am the Outreach and Training Manager at YouthLine, and I'm really thrilled to see so many of you who are able to come here today as we celebrate YouthLine's founding and commemorate 3 decades of dedication and service to the 2SLGBTQ plus community, as well as connect with folks who work in the community here in Sudbury and have their experiences shared and discussed today. LGBT YouthLine works in the place often referred to as Ontario, which continues to be colonized land and is home to many Indigenous communities. Our head office is in Toronto, the land of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Wendat and Petun First Nations, the Seneca, and most recently the Mississaugas of the New Credit River. Today, the meeting place of Toronto remains home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and YouthLine works in this community, in this context, and on this territory. This afternoon, we're excited to engage in an intergenerational celebration of YouthLine's 30 years and a reflection on 2SLGBTQ plus organizing. We're excited to hear from some of these amazing movement builders and organizers and hear about their respective journeys in contributing to a world where 2SLGBTQ plus youth are safe and celebrated as their authentic selves. And the bathrooms are just outside the back of the room if you need to use them. Please note that if you don't want any photos taken of you, we have yellow stickers available at the table over there. And please, you can put one of those stickers on yourself if you would not like any photos taken. We also have a live stream playing, so that had started recording already, and the live stream is playing over YouTube for folks to check out, and it will be available as a recording after the event. We are delighted to partner with the Cambrian College Equity Center today, which has provided the venue and helped with promotion and logistics, and with Rousseau Access Network, which has assisted with promotion. We're also honored to partner with Cambrian College Indigenous Student Circle today, and I'd like to hand the mic over to Alexie and Nigazid of the Indigenous Student Circle at Cambrian College to say a few words.
Ani, everyone. I know there's quite a few familiar faces in the room here, and I'm grateful to be here to share our stories with everyone here. So today I'd like to share a little bit about what Two-Spirit means. And it's a term that is often used alongside LGBT, 2SLGBTQIA+. It's a term that was coined in the 90s by a woman who the name escapes me at the moment, but from Manitoba. And it's a term that encompasses a lot of different identities within Indigenous culture. So it is primarily a cultural and a spiritual term. If you look at people who are gender minorities or sexual minorities, there is a focus on the sexual and the gender identity, and that's fantastic. When it comes to Two-Spirit, there are people who do fall under the umbrella of queer or LGBT who are Two-Spirit but are not necessarily, or people who are queer but not necessarily Two-Spirit. So there is a large overlap, but it's not necessary. For me personally, being a Two-Spirit individual, what it means for me is encompassing masculine characteristics, feminine characteristics, and combining them. Like my spirit name, Uncle Bijiget Amek, which means the beaver who creates connections with other living beings. There's a vision with that, where a beaver is building a dam, and dams flood lands. They help create communities for a diverse population of plants and animals. But the way that they create these diverse populations is by connecting one side of the river to the other. They're connecting one opposite with the other to create one unified whole. And that is for me what Two-Spirit is. And for every other Two-Spirit individual, it is different how that term relates to them. And that is my understanding of Two-Spirit. And again, everyone has their own different understanding of it. And I welcome you to explore what it means for you and for the people around you. And today, I'm grateful to be a part of here, making connections with every one of you. Miigwech.
Miigwech, Alexie. Hello, folks. My name's Katrina. I'll be moderating the panel today. And I'd love to welcome our panelists. So our panel is comprised of community workers, organizers, activists, and artists. Everyone here has had an impact on their community and even directly with YouthLine for some folks. And we're very happy to have them here and speaking with us today. Starting with myself, I use they, them pronouns. I'm the Northern Rural Remote and Indigenous Outreach and Engagement Specialist. Yes, it is a mouthful, I know. Personally, I like to hang out with my pets, and I love looking at Indigenous art. I'm currently reconnecting to my history. And our first panelist, we just heard from them, is Alexie, who is part of the Beaver Clan and is Two-Spirit. She was born in Chicoutimi, Quebec, but lives currently in Sudbury. Her family moved between Ontario and Quebec throughout much of her life due to her father's military career. Nearly a decade ago, Alexie followed in his footsteps and joined the military, which led her to Sudbury. Here, she shifted focus and returned to school to study Indigenous social service work at Cambrian, where we are all at, and currently serves as the leader for Cambrian's Indigenous Student Circle, where she advocates for Indigenous students and fosters a welcoming and inclusive environment. Next, at the very end of our table, we have Sophie Kuhn. Sophie is a she-they registered social worker based in Thunder Bay, Ontario. They hold, you can see their qualifications up there, from Lakehead, and have a background in facilitating and coordinating peer support groups, developing community capacity, and conducting research towards understanding the impacts of peer support on queer youth in Northern Ontario. Sophie has been a volunteer with LGBT YouthLine for 2 years and is a proud parent to 2 rescue cats, enjoys writing poetry, playing D&D, and camping at Sleeping Giant Provincial Park. We're very excited to hear from all of you, and in the middle you may recognize Gaston from upstairs, who has so wonderfully helped us to promote and find this space and is now filling in on our panel. So to start us off with the panel questions is just a little bit more of an introduction. So if everybody could take a chance and introduce themselves, share a bit about their journey in activism or community organizing, especially as it relates to Northern, rural, and Indigenous communities. We'll start with Alexie, who's right next to me. Might have to flick a switch.
Is this working here? Excellent. For me, activism. I see our existence as queer people, as Two-Spirit people, to be an act of resistance, to be political. And I see simply our existence as being activism. We are active in our lives, in our communities. We are active in our jobs, in our families. And we are active here today. For me, the way that I engage in activism is more of an invisible or more of an internal way, where the way that I engage with people, my language, the people that I choose to engage with, and really practicing radical empathy. And for me, it's creating those connections, and making sure that everyone is heard and our voices are valued. And for me, carrying that into my role as Eniganzit on the Indigenous Student Circle here at Cambrian is making sure that the needs are met, regardless of who you are and where you've come from. Miigwech.
Miigwech. I think we'll pass it down the line. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think it's a good question because activism means a lot to all of us in a different way. Myself, it's a lot of advocacy work, especially navigating systems. I've worked across the generation within summer camp, schools, universities, and then long-term care. So I've seen how these systems can really exclude people. And even my own experiences navigating systems, feeling not seen, or really seeing how when there is not representation within these systems, it harms everyone in our community. And directly, like if we aren't the ones making the changes and advocating for ourselves in our communities, that's not going to happen, especially in rural areas where if one person moves or funding is cut, that service is gone. And that leaves ripples in the community. So my experiences running peer support and learning as I go how to best support my community and myself has really been formative for me and changed kind of the trajectory of my career. And yeah, I think that's been a big part of my journey as an activist, and especially working with YouthLine. I think you hear so many people's stories, and I think it's really a privilege and an honor to bear witness to so many people's experiences in rural and northern areas. And yeah, I think that's a really big part of community organizing for me.
Awesome, thank you. And Gaston?
Hello. Being the oldest one here, I believe, like really old, activism had a different meaning for me back in the day, in a sense that I didn't come out of the closet till I was 22, which is considered a little late, considered today's standards, although some people do choose to come out later or identify later. But for me, when I came out, there was really nothing. There was no activism, especially in Sudbury. And the only place to be active, if you wanted to protest, if you wanted to say something, was your local HIV, your AIDS association. So if you wanted to be present, you wanted to be heard, you actually volunteered at your AIDS association. So I did, and that's when I started getting involved. And then I was lucky enough that I got hired by them to do education, to do peer mentorship with young youth, to have support group for youth coming out of the closet, or just they're struggling at home. They came out to their parents, they got kicked out, and that's where I began my journey. That's where I think, 15 years ago, when I got to know about YouthLine and got involved with them also within Sudbury to make sure there was a system in place, there was people involved, there was people there to support one another. And that's when you started seeing Sudbury actually coming together. Although activism has been around for a very long time in Sudbury with queer communities, the AIDS associations were really the root of activism. If it wouldn't be for HIV, the struggles that gay men were going through, the prejudice, the ignorance, that's what helped us to get the movement that we needed. So yeah, that's my little journey.
Kind of built momentum there.
Yeah.
For sure. So our next question are, what are some of the ways that you have found community organizing differs in northern and rural areas compared to maybe more larger cities, more southern cities where access is a little bit easier to come by?
Well, for me, on my role on student government, I've noticed that a lot of our Indigenous students are coming from very rural areas. Some of them even come from different provinces. And part of that challenge of creating a welcoming and inclusive environment is that a lot of these people that are coming from very far north, like James Bay area or Manitoba or even Quebec, that they feel like this is the big city, right? This is the capital of Northern Ontario. And in my opinion, Northern Ontario should be its own province, but that's its own thing. And so we are the big city. And it's interesting comparing for like a lot of people from YouthLine are coming from Toronto. And like for here, this is like out in the boonies. But creating that welcoming and inclusive environment where we're helping these students understand what bar is. And a lot of people don't even know what a gay bar is, and are maybe hesitant to enter as they might not have had prior exposure to their home communities. And I'm grateful that we do have a gay bar here, Zig's, where it really does feel different when you're entering. And also too with Indigenous communities, there are a lot of reserves that still have a more Christian idea on how things work. And so some communities don't even have any culture on their reserves, which I feel is is really unfortunate. But we're here to build a home, to bring culture back for students, and so that they can engage in a way that they feel safe and familiar. And part of that is the powwow that we have here at Cambrian. Unfortunately, it was canceled this year. I'm really sad about that, but we are looking to see possibly if we can have it held on a different date. But that's really what we do on the Indigenous Student Circle, is ensuring that students, we meet them where they're at. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I grew up in rural southern Ontario, but I've been all across Canada with my family, from Montreal to Toronto to Ottawa to Philadelphia. Like, my family's quite spread out. So I've been able to see these differences really starkly. And I think a big part of that is access and dedicated spaces for youth and queer people. And specifically, I think gay bars is a really important topic to bring up, because where I'm flew from to get here, Thunder Bay doesn't have a gay bar at all. So it really makes you kind of question, are spaces safe, are they not? And the only way to know that is to connect with other people in the community and ask them, is this a safe space? What's the vibe? And how do I find other people? Either, how do I find people to date? Like, these are the questions that come up at peer support. It's like, how do you even know, how do you flirt with someone? I don't know how to do this, because it's just really hard in rural northern areas. If you're not from there, to meet people, even if you're there, it's smaller, people know each other. So there's a daunting aspect of, like, if I go to a smaller Pride March and someone sees me, I'm out immediately. So there's a lot of things there that are different. But on the flip side as well, that smaller size makes people more connected, and it makes us depend on each other for survival. And there's a huge chosen family element that you are kind of put into. So we all are taking responsibility for each other's safety and well-being through mutual aid, and you kind of are forced to get to know people really well. And I think there's something really special about that. There's also, like, transportation is a thing in the north that's hard. I think we all complain about the buses in Thunder Bay, and I've heard Sudbury, but we figure it out, but it's not as easy, and I think that makes us stronger, because we have to learn how to navigate these sort of challenges.
Yeah, kind of building on what Alexie was saying about having to build your own community, because accessing the different services is just not going to be as easy, right? I think anyone who's been in Sudbury for long enough is probably aware of the fact that there are some health services you're just not going to get here. It's just not possible. You're going to have to go south. And that's true for everywhere, unfortunately. So Gaston, what are some ways you have found community organizing differs between communities in rural or northern areas?
I find it's very, very different. Your approach has to be so different when you're living in a small rural community. I remember when I started working 20-some years ago in HIV and queer health and all those things, and you need to get the buy-in from your community. You didn't want to just show up and they start calling you, you faggot, da-da-da. But first of all, you're out there, you have to show your face. That means that I have to be out publicly. But I knew that was important because I could be a mentor to a younger queer kid. But it's also meant I couldn't use the tactic that were happening down south. Because when you gather, you have a large metropolitan, you have a large amount of queer kids, adults living in a community. There's a sense of community that's already established, right? There's church, there's the village. Like, you go there, you feel like you're at home. You don't have to hide. Up north, it's a lot different. So you really have to build those relationships. And I remember working with the community, the school boards, trying to create these youth groups and trying to, a trans group. And we're trying to build a clinic just for men, for queer men. I couldn't just open it. I really had to work on establishing very great relationship, and that had to build trust. They had to know that our intention was for this reason. It wasn't just to cause crap. It wasn't just to be loud. A parade would have not worked, right? March would have not worked. but building those relationships one by one within the school board and showing this is where we're coming, because the rates of suicide was so high, the rate of HIV is much more higher. And once we got to establish this relationship, we were able to go into the schools. Then we got the buy-in. Then the parents were okay. They were calling us, but that took a very long time.
Change is slow, and a community has to want to change, right? You have to invite them in. In the cities, it's the population is so much larger, like everyone's been saying, versus in Northern Ontario, where the population is much smaller. The risk of safety is a lot. It's hard to be out, especially when you're scared. I grew up in a town of 1,000 people. My mom knew and I came out to my friends in high school. She was waiting for me when I got home.
Yeah,
it wasn't too bad for me, thankfully. But that's a pretty common story in a more rural area. Everybody knows everybody's business because everybody sees everybody's business.
It's also like the rates of kids or youth that would leave a small community to greater centers. Right, and that's scary for me. Like to know that you're 14, you're 16, you're not accepted at home. You don't have a sense of community in your small town because everyone knows. So right away you get on a bus, you hitchhike, you go down to Toronto, and hopefully you'll succeed. Hopefully you'll find a chosen family. Hopefully you'll know what to do. Most of the time, those kids were put at risk. They were for human trafficking, for sex work. The risks are much greater. Although we think everything is great down south, which it is, but it's still very scary.
And they're very vulnerable. Our youth are vulnerable. And like you were saying, the risk of sex trafficking, the risk of being taken advantage of getting to a strange new city and not knowing where to go or who to talk to, when all of a sudden you are in a city that your previous city could fit in 6 times over and still have space, right?
Yeah, I think that there was something that you touched on, Gaston, that was really resonated with me, which is you have to be visible in a smaller area. Like when I was in Toronto, it was overwhelming how many options, and you kind of have anonymity, and you can, for me, I think I took for granted how many events there were and how many spaces, Glad Day Books, walking down Church and Wellesley, there's like drag brunch and all of these things, and I wouldn't get as involved because I knew they were always there. But then in Thunder Bay, the way I came out to my family was because I became an assistant at Pride Central, and they didn't know, and the only reason I did it because I wanted to be there for my community, and it just sort of happened that way. So I think it's really interesting when you're in northern communities, it does something, it forces you to sort of take ownership of, okay, something needs to happen because there's people, like I think for me it was during COVID, I recognized people were struggling, they were disconnected, the center was closed down. So you have to step into that space, especially if I was a little older than some of my other peers as a mature student. So yeah, and I think that did me a really it was really good for me to learn in that position, and then it helped other students who then, you share skills, and then they learn how to support and run the community center, and then it becomes that sort of, that's what the communities need in rural areas, I think.
Yeah, the visibility, for sure.
There's also a big, huge risk, right? When you talk about visibility, you're talking about employment, you're talking about neighbors, you're that if you're going to put yourself out there, you have to deal with everything that's going to come with it. Like I remember working as a nurse, and I hid my sexuality for 3 years, and I was married to a man. I called her Julie. Like everyone thought I was married to a woman, but I wouldn't want to say his name because what happens if my employer knows? Even though we're living in the 2000s, it was still a risk that I had because I was afraid to lose my job. So
yeah,
it's the
definitely.
reality.
I do think that's a big thing, even on campus, like that people would say this, in the center it feels so safe and I can be myself. I take 2 steps out in the hallway and suddenly people are calling me names, or they can, it's just such a different experience being in the community space and then being in the rest of your rural community, and that can really have safety that can cause safety issues, absolutely, and makes people, I think, more hesitant sometimes.
Yeah, I can share an experience myself where 5 years ago, I came out to my place of work, and immediately they brought me into a meeting with the owner, my manager, and the manager of HR, and they said, "We're not going to let you change our culture here." A few weeks later, I was fired for an unrelated reason, but they made it very clear that they did not want me there. And so even that was 2020 during the pandemic, they made it very clear that they did not want someone like me there. So I had to find a place and create a place where people are welcomed no matter who they are. And it is unfortunate that it still happens to this day, but it offered me an opportunity to stay at home during the pandemic and just focus on myself. And so through that bigotry, I was able to heal and to help myself. And that is balance. And that's a very important concept in Indigenous culture, is how do we maintain balance throughout everything?
Thank you for sharing that. Before we move on to the next point, I think we expect our youth to be resilient because they have to be, especially in small northern rural spaces. They have to be resilient because there isn't another option. Personally, I hope for a future where they can be soft. What are some ways that intergenerational relationships can be strengthened in 2SLGBTQ+ spaces to ensure that wisdom and connections are shared across time?
In Indigenous culture, in Indigenous communities, we're talking a lot about our elders. And our elders, they're not going to be here forever. In fact, there are many who right now have gone to the spirit world. That is a wealth of knowledge, a wealth of experience. And if we look at the seventh fire prophecy, where each fire or each generation had a role to play, and the seventh fire are the ones that are currently passing off, the ones that are supposed to carry that culture into the eighth fire, our generation. And to sew those intergenerational fabrics together, where as youth, Two-Spirit youth, we're going to see our elders, our Two-Spirit elders, and hearing from their experiences, hearing what they have to share about, like the teachings that they have to share, cultural practices. And like, for example, a few decades ago, drumming was only done by men. And there are a lot of protest groups of women drum groups that said, no, we're going to be drumming no matter what. And so now it's commonly accepted for women to do hand drumming. Unfortunately, the powwow, the big drum, is still only men can do it. But in some circles, Two-Spirit people and women are drumming on the big drum, but we're not there yet. So even in Indigenous community, we're trying to push that colonization that has been put onto our community, and intergenerational connections is a huge, a significant solution to helping go from one generation to the next.
I think that's a really good point. I think there's a lot of different ways we can try to strengthen intergenerational relationships. And I think the more ways we try, the better, because absolutely there's been a lot of and continued attempts to stop that transmission of knowledge and wisdom between the generations in the queer community. I think taking a step back and looking at the life cycle. For me, working with kids in summer camp and seeing queer kids in summer camp, and then looking in the long-term care and looking at all of the ways and all the systems we interact in, and finding ways to bring people from the different generations together and listen to each other's stories. I think storytelling is so important. I think advocating for research that reflects the lived experiences of people in our communities is really important as well, because we know that there is actively people trying to make sure that research is not being done for a reason, and that harms everyone. But also recognizing like art and storytelling and even just sitting and talking with one another is actively building relationships. And we all, no matter what your age, you have lessons you have learned and wisdom you have gained from universal experiences and also unique experiences as well. So I think we have to, make room and more opportunities to talk to each other and be willing to listen to everyone's stories and honor the fact that we have so much to share and gain from each other.
For sure. And what a privilege it is to grow old, right? Gaston?
She says that. When I saw the question, I found it interesting, right? Because I think we need to acknowledge the fact that there's a generation or two of queer people that have passed away. So there's lots of lost knowledge. You know, like there's my generation, which is, I think it's one of the best, but the generation before me, like I was at the tail end of the HIV epidemic, right? So we've lost friends. And then the queer men that were older than me, who took me in, who shared some knowledge, was very limiting. But I would hear their story. You know, they've lost an entire circle of friends. So much knowledge that's gone. And if it wouldn't have been for the queer lesbian community, that information would have never been shared. So it saddens me. But now I'm getting to a point that I'm getting to be one of the older queer men, which is great. I think that it comes with lots of great things. That, you know, I'm going to be 50. I'm enjoying this. But I love sitting down with youth and sharing with them what I've learned. And I remember as a young queer kid sitting with a bunch of older guys, and they were telling me their stories from the 60s and the 70s about this and how things worked, how you went cruising and how did you meet other guys, and we used the back pages and we did this, and how we hid, or so-and-so was married but he also was, you know, it was very interesting. And they would also give us messages of, or warnings. Be careful when you do this, do that. That's the only part, that's the only place where I got my sex ed. Because sex ed back in the 80s and 90s was not, it was very heteronormative sex, right? We weren't talking about homosexual sex. We weren't talking about how to protect yourself. You weren't taught that. So if it wouldn't have been for these men in my life who taught me, okay, this is what you need to do to protect yourself, I probably would have been one of those people who would have, you know, been infected with HIV. I mean, HIV is on a death sentence today, which is great because, you know, medication, where we're at. But if it wouldn't have been for them, who knows? And I hope that I do have more opportunities to sit down with queer youth and just kind of share. I'm like, well, you know, in the 90s, we didn't have a phone. We talked to each other in the bar. Like, it's very different. Like, when I go to a queer bar, I'm just like, what is going on, right? But it's kind of fun getting old and getting to share what we've learned and how we've experienced, so.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you touched on a really good point in that we have to be fighting for the things we need to continue generations thriving, whether it's suicide rates among youth. I think the YouthLine is really doing good work with this too, and there's so many organizations that are recognizing, you know, we want every part of our community, whatever generation they are, to have what they need to thrive so we can have these stories shared, whether it's through art and film or poetry, writing, or just talking at a bar. I think those things are really important, and we can't have intergenerational knowledge if we don't have housing, mental health care, gender affirming care. All of these things are like really important, and I think that we know that, but I think that we continue to need to have to be loud about it and fight for that, because definitely we don't see enough intergenerational points of connection for our community in the rural areas. I notice there's lots of youth together, but then I also wonder, where is everyone else? And I want to continue to have us look for each other and grow old so that we can even strengthen our community further.
For sure. And it's kind of like Gaston said, we see a lot of youth who leave. You know, half the people I went to school with, went to high school with, all of them went to big cities. Every last one of them went to a big city. Most of them went to southern big cities because they couldn't access gender-affirming care. Most of them don't even come home anymore because the community is not super welcoming. And times have changed. It's been over a decade. Some things have changed and shifted, but in some ways, things haven't changed. So it's important to be loud, get our voices out there, and also to listen to our older queer folks who want to share that knowledge, because it is such a blessing to have older queer folks. Like Gaston was saying, we lost generations to the AIDS pandemic, and that's a part of history that shouldn't be forgotten. They fought for us quite literally with their lives. There were days where folks were attending funerals every single day. Every single day somebody died. For weeks, until healthcare started to take that a little bit more seriously. So it's also important to know that where we have come from has come from the blood, sweat, and tears of those who came before us.
Yeah, and an example where I'm currently working on planning and implementing a summit for HIV-positive youth in Southern Ontario through the AIDS Committee of Durham Region. And so I'm helping expand and add Indigenous programming, but I was looking to see if we can get an elder part of the event, And I was speaking with some of the other organizers, and they were saying that a challenge is that elders that are HIV positive, they're not alive anymore, right? We have people probably in their 50s who are HIV positive, and that's about as old as you get because of the history of HIV. And so I find it quite a significant challenge to even create those links for, like, in Indigenous culture, we have elders and our youth that are very close together. In fact, on the medicine wheel, you have the North and the East that are right next. And so those links are very natural to make in the Indigenous community. But again, because of the HIV or AIDS epidemic, there has been that severing of intergenerational relationships, and it continues to be difficult. We were able to find someone who we might be able to ask, but they're in their 50s, and so that's not really elder age, right? So it's going to be interesting how we can go according to cultural protocols while maintaining support for HIV positive youth.
I just want to add one little thing. I know we live up north and it's already isolating. I think being queer and getting older is very isolating, right? So having youth reach out to the seniors or, you know, your older queers, I think it's a great thing, because you can grow out old being alone because you've never been out, or you were afraid of coming out. You had your own fear of, like, people knowing who you are, so you live in isolation. So growing old is already isolating, but even growing old as a queer can be even more isolating. So to have that connection between youth and seniors, it's a great thing. It's a beautiful thing.
I think it's something that you realize how important it is in a rural northern area as well. The isolation you might feel as, like, a queer youth. I feel like that is probably similar when you're getting older, and your community, it feels like, shrinks sometimes in those spaces. And I think what I see that's incredible is people who are in university connecting with, like, kids in high school and GSAs, and just seeing each other, you're like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. You get more excited to, like, oh my gosh, another person that I can immediately recognize and see myself in my community. And then also, like, I see people in my community volunteering in long-term care with other queer elders, and being with them through palliative care. And I think that those sort of things are so beautiful, and I think that's something that the more we do, the better. And it's really, like, we can't take these connections and relationships for granted in smaller areas.
For sure. Moving to our next question. This one's kind of a long one, so bear with me, folks. What does it mean to decolonize queer and trans activism, and what steps actually need to be taken to make spaces truly inclusive for Indigenous people? A little addendum would be, what services do you know of that have successfully made changes, and what do those changes end up looking like in a community?
Well, I can speak about two-spirit understanding, where we understand that two-spirit is a cultural and a spiritual identity. There is a lot of overlap with the sexual and gender identities as well. But that's really how a lot of queer Indigenous people choose to present themselves, is like I myself, I tend to not go by sexual or gender identities, and that's okay. I prefer the cultural and the spiritual terms for myself. Although the gender and the sexual terms do help me understand myself in the way that I engage with the world around me. But in terms of services that have made those changes, like again, going back with the AIDS Committee of Durham Region, where like last year I facilitated workshops on HIV and the medicine wheel. That was the only Indigenous programming. But this year, they've committed to increasing the amount of Indigenous youth that are present at the event. And I've been working on getting Indigenous programming, on having an elder on board, and to make sure that there are a culturally safe space within the this HYPE summit, as it's called. Because we know that HIV affects different populations. When I was there last year, for example, there was yes, true, a lot of queer men, but there was also a lot of Black people, Afro-Caribbean people, and their interaction with HIV was at birth, whereas with the queer men, it was more of an acquired through intercourse. Whereas with Indigenous people, a lot of the way that they get HIV is through drug use, intravenous drug use. So there is differences in how HIV interacts with the different populations, but ensuring that we understand these intersections, these different intersections on how all of these challenges interact with each other with different demographics.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think when we look at activism in our communities, specifically in northern rural areas, if they are not centering Indigenous knowledge and community members, then there's something deeply wrong. So when I look around in any space I am, and if I don't see my community represented the way that it is, that shows that there is need to like do some. I think looking at how we internalize colonialism, questioning and critiquing the systems and the processes that lead to the exclusion of Indigenous people in spaces, I think is really important. And I think talking about attacks on healthcare and safe supply, those things directly impact our community and also lead to breaking intergenerational relationships that I think if we're not talking about those loudly and showing up for and fighting and saying like, why is this happening in our communities? We have to show up for each other, and we have to go into the spaces where this work is being done and support the organizations that are doing that and the activists in our community. There's safety in numbers, especially in rural areas. So the more people that show up, the safer. And the more we show that it is not okay when people are discriminating against trans people in our communities, Indigenous people, Two-Spirit people in our communities. Yeah, I think that those things become even more important in smaller rural areas. And if we don't do that, then it just continues to harm people. So I think specifically of the way that safe supply is being attacked in our community. I think specifically about the work that's being done to sort of to advocate for people in those spaces is a really big piece of that. Yeah.
I mean, where to start?
It's a big
I mean, it was
question.
I remember the conversation when we added the 2S to the acronym. That was a big deal, right? It wasn't really what the heck's going on? What does that mean? Why do they need their own space? And I think acknowledging the fact that queer and Indigenous people do exist, they're part of our circle, they're part of the queer community was important. But there's so much more work that needs to be done. It's also having the Indigenous lens when planning activism, when planning events, to make sure the youth are recognized that the Indigenous communities are involved and they have a voice. Its pride is, maybe like 50 years ago or 25 years ago was mostly white folks yelling in the street, but I think it's greater than that. I think, you need to have the ACVB voices, the African Black Caribbean voice. You need to have Black Lives Matter. You need to have the Indigenous voice, because our community is not just a bunch of white folks. Like, it's a beautiful community, and everyone needs to, have a voice, and because your issues are different than mine, and we have to recognizing that. It's not a competition, but we need to recognize that everyone comes with different struggles, and it's real.
Yeah, I think kind of bringing back to what you said, and both of you said about building relationships, it's long-term work. I mean, decolonization work is not, you do one thing and it's done. It's a long-term ongoing struggle that is going to and has to continue to span across generations. And I think the more we are like cognizant of like intersectional and dual identities within our communities, the impacts ongoing and historical of colonial violence and structural violence, those sort of things are really important, showing up for each other and listening to each other as well, like you said.
So recognizing the way that colonialism impacts different communities and then listening to those communities on how they'd like to address it. Sounds simple, a little harder to put in practice.
There's a fantastic expression that we say often: nothing about us without us.
Mm-hmm. I think there's really great people in our community doing this work and uplifting and celebrating, for me, Indigenous scholarship and the people in our community that are there, and we just need to like continue to share all the amazing work that's being done, like you said. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, folks. And now we have my favorite question. In recent months, we've seen a lot of challenges, but we've also seen moments of strengths in our 2SLGBTQ communities. What are your reflections on where our communities are right now? And what do you see as next steps for advocacy, safety, and empowerment? And what examples give you hope for the future?
That's a good question.
I remember seeing something
Thank
on I remember seeing something go by on Facebook. It said, bigots were never able to create a space where queer people were never able to thrive. And you look at the past where in the 50s, 60s, 70s, where things were pretty awful, queer people were still able to thrive. And we're looking again in what's happened in the States. And we have, even here in Canada, where the leader of the Conservative Party in 2006 tried to pass a bill to ban gay marriage. There are trying to have these pushing back, but again, it's never going to create an atmosphere that queer people cannot thrive. And I think that just really reflects the resiliency of our community.
Yeah, I think, I don't know what everyone else has been seeing in the news lately, but I've been seeing lots of stuff about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think what I witness and what it serves for me is a reminder that under colonial and capitalist systems, our rights are always going to be under attack. And it's just a part of our reality, and we continue to push towards safer and better ways to take care of each other. But it is really scary, and the news is never, we have to make sure that we're taking care of each other, which I think our community is very good at, and ourselves as well. So when I think of those sort of things, I think of the strengths we have and mutual aid and the need to get involved and use the services in our community and share those services and resources with each other, whether they're food banks or libraries or yeah, I think those things are really important. And volunteering, if you have the ability to do that. All of those things are really important. And educating ourselves is really important because they don't, I think a lot of people right now don't want us to know our rights and don't want us to recognize that the collective power we have to take care of each other and push back against a lot of the things that are going on right now. I think that's empowering to me and makes me feel safer.
Yeah, for sure. Being able to see your community show up for you when you show up for them is always much appreciated. What about you, Gaston?
I just find it, you're working with youth, you're working with young people in their 20s, and you really want to send them off in the world that's going to be accepted. And you're promising them that, right? Because I get to live my life as a queer man. I happen to have children. I feel like, I want to make sure that they know that they can have that. But knowing that I'm sending them out, and then I'm like, oh crap, with everything going on, it's kind of going backwards in a sense. Like I fought what I fought to give the youth a greater voice, feeling more comfortable, being able to come out when they're 12, 13, 14, and feeling safe. But now it's almost like I'm afraid my messaging to them has to be like, okay, you can be you, just, be careful. Mm-hmm. Or you can do this, but just watch out. Or this is what you need to know. Like, I don't like having to talk like that. I think it's creating fear. There's so much minority stress that they have to work with. It's challenging. I think it's going to get better, of course, with more voices, the community getting together, having events like this. It's good. But I don't want to send out a mixed messaging telling youth, get out there, you'll be fine, because you're not. That's the scary part for me.
Yeah, I think it's the thing I see a lot as well, and I think is important to remember is it's not an option when you're an activist in a northern rural area to not take care of yourself. You have to be, and I think the more we all are involved, the more people have the opportunity to take a break when they need it, because others are going to be there to step up and take care of them. And I think that's a really important thing to remember, is that I think that was something you mentioned, is showing up, being visible or not visible, being not out of the closet, being out of the closet. Your existence is, I think, so important and shows that queer people have always existed and will always exist, and we will always step up to take care of each other because we have to. We have no option. And I think there's something really special about that. I think about my younger sibling who's trans, and I think of my older sibling who's trans, and I think of like how cool it is that that for me the future is not even having to come out. And I see some of those improvements in the systems that are making them feel safer, and I see movement forward, and I see that is a direct result of the work people who came before me have done. So I think that's like really special, and remembering our history, the struggles of our history, and also the successes and the great things we have won is really important too.
Mm-hmm. I find it interesting. I saw a poll recently where a bunch of Americans were asked, what percentage of the population do you think is trans? And people answered 20%, 30%. Well, that's a lot of people. 30% of the population is transgender? Nope, not at all. In fact, in the Canadian census in, I think it was 2020 or 2021, they actually did, for the first time, count how many trans people there are. 0.3% of the population is transgender and non-binary. Well, you might say, well, aren't younger people more trans than older generations? Yeah, but not by much. They also based it on by age groups. So for below the age of 30, it was 0.7% of the population is transgender and non-binary. That's still a very small minority. In fact, you're seeing a lot of these bills passed in states banning transgender children from participating in sports of their gender identity. Those bills are probably affecting a small handful of people. Like in some states, it affects 3 children, maybe even none. Why are they focusing on this? Well, you look at the manosphere, for example, which is a lot of podcasts like Andrew Tate, for example, where they're Joe Rogan, where they're talking about these issues without representing the voices of the people that they're talking about, and they're misrepresenting information. Nobody's doing surgery on children. Like banning these surgeries, well, these surgeries are not happening on children. They're not focusing on the right issues right now. And you look, for example, on Facebook, on social media, 80% of the social media posts and people that are talking about transgender people are people that are on that right wing. Very small percentages of people talking about transgender people are actually part of the left. So I find it very interesting that there's this disproportionate focus from conservatives and right-wing people on gender and sexual minorities, where it's trying to roll back the clock. And I find that is awful. But then we're looking at the strength of our community, our resiliency. Just at the Friendship Center, for example, here in town, there's 2 spirit teachings that were being shared over the past few months. And I had the pleasure of participating and sharing my experiences. We're seeing a lot of grassroots, a lot of people from the ground up forming communities, understanding that the world is on fire right now, and that's not okay. But we're okay. We're together. And it's creating those connections and being safe together.
Yeah, I think that's really a really good way to answer the question. I think it's important to, I think right now it's important to see what's going on across the border and see that these things we fought for are not a given, and if they can be taken away. So we have to continue to build strong communities that can make sure that these things are around for a very long time. Gender affirming care. I think things like the YouthLine, services that are really making an impact to our youth. These things, we're at the stage now where I think we have so much more to fight for, and we have so much to look back at and learn from as well.
We've come a long way, but we still have a long way to go. And that's okay. What about you, Gaston?
I mean, you both said what needs to say. I think we have to be realistic of where we're at. And I think we know there's lots more work to be done. And I think it's just coming together as a community, having little events like this. I think just making our voice heard, that helps. If we have one young queer kid that sees me in the street or sees me holding my spouse's hand, that brings joy. That makes you okay, that's okay. I can do this, you know? It brings a little hope. Like, I remember being a queer kid and seeing my first kissing scene on a movie. Wow, like, you know, that was amazing to see myself in movies. And I think those little things, those are little achievements. Those are great things. And I think it's to focus on that.
I agree. I also think it's so important for youth to get to see older queer people, see them live happy, fulfilling queer lives and age, because how awesome is that? Like you said, when you saw your first scene where somebody kissed, or when a young queer person might see you holding your husband's hand as you walk, and that inspires them, because I can get old and I can have love and I can be happy, and that's really beautiful. Now we're coming to our Q&A. So if anybody has any questions from the audience, not to put you on the spot.
Hi. So thinking about young people in particular who they're just starting to learn how to use their voice, who might be in a situation where they're willing to sacrifice their own comfort for the comfort of those in the room around them, to becoming that person, maybe like the panelists today, who people wouldn't say something homophobic in front of because they know that that's not something that they can get away with in front of you. So that transition period from not necessarily scared, but maybe a youth who doesn't know how to use their voice in a strong way yet, to knowing how and when to use your voice. There's a lot that happens between those two periods, between that transition. Maybe sometimes that youth comes on a little too strong in a room, or maybe, you know, they're gonna say something and their voice shakes too hard, so they retreat. Is there language that you can provide the people in the room, things to say when you're faced with difficult situations and you want to stand up for young queer people or queer people in general?
I have this, there's a saying that I really like, which is anger is love you have for yourself. If you're angry, that is coming from a place of, I recognize I'm not getting what I deserve. So honoring your voice that is telling you that, and being like, yeah, be too much, have your voice shake. You can get emotional and cry because that's all part of the experience. So I think the honoring your voice internally and knowing, like, even if you don't speak up in a moment where you're like, oh, I wish I'd said something, oh, that's so annoying. I think that is part of the process, and there's no right or wrong way to be and exist. Yeah, I think that's how you grow.
Yeah, to pull something from a class in social work, and I know there's a few social service work students here in the room. We're talking about assertiveness, and with assertiveness comes a scale, if you will. On one end, you have passiveness, and on the other end, you have aggressiveness. And we try to remain balanced in the middle. What is passiveness? You're withholding yourself. You're letting other people step on you. You're not okay, but they are. On the other hand, on the aggressive side of things, where you're a little coming up too strong and then you're the one stepping on other people. Maybe you don't know you're stepping on other people. You're okay, they're not. So how do you maintain that balance? And that's assertiveness, where you stand your ground, you make sure that your needs are met while recognizing that the other people in front of you also have needs, that they need to be spoken to respectfully. And in that case, you are okay and they are okay. And remaining balanced and understanding that we may sometimes be passive or aggressive, but to recognize that we can maintain balance and be assertive.
Any thoughts you'd like to add, Gaston?
I mean, to get to that point where you have a voice, you have to go through so much and build your confidence, right? It's celebrating those little moments of victory. It's celebrating that, like, when you finally do come out to a perfect stranger, you're like, wow, that was pretty awesome. There was no judgment. And then you get to move on to maybe your cousin. You build up that confidence as you go and as you get older, and that makes a big difference. And I think if it's also like, if you are in a position as someone who's in the community, who's out, who's proud, it's to recognize, and it's just to see those youth and acknowledging them, acknowledging their existence, letting him know that, I see you. and I'm going to help you speak. If I have to speak for you right now, I'm happy to do so, but I'm also here to raise you up. Like, raise your voice. I'm here to support you.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think finding the spaces that value your voice, finding this, like you mentioned, Gaston, finding the spaces where you can vent and get all of your frustration out is so important. And there are spaces there for you to do that, whether it's on a helpline, whether it's at a student center, or to a friend over dinner, or playing Dungeons and Dragons, wherever it is for you. Find those spaces because those are so important. And yeah, I think it's okay to make mistakes and come on too strong. I think I've done that so many times, I can't even tell you. And I think that, yeah, then also seeing each other and saying, are you okay? I saw what that person said. And you don't have to say anything, and I hear you, and just know that I'm there for you. I think those things are really important, and then people are doing that, and also just checking in on yourself and being gentle, having compassion for yourself when those things happen and you don't know what to say, because what do you say in the face of so much stuff going on, right?
Thank you. I'm going to add on to this. I think something that's important is you will always throughout your life, there will be people who will become an advocate for a community, for a minority group. And learning to deal with that and handle that can be very, very hard, and it's not for everybody. You have to take care of yourself first and foremost. You have to do the things that fill your spirit up, and be safe. And my advice for folks is to know your exit plan. Wherever you are, wherever you're going, make sure that you have safety in the back of your head. Know how to get out the door, know who your friends are in the room. So when someone does say something and you do choose maybe to confront them on that, which could be something as simple as saying, what's the joke? I don't think that's funny. Explain it to me, and watch them flounder for a second. Or I don't think that's true, and wait. I like to confront with questions, obviously. But also making sure there's somebody who has your back in the room. And if there's not somebody who has your back, then you know how to get out of the room. Any other questions from the crowd? Viv?
Thanks. This is not a question, it's a follow-up to something that was mentioned earlier on. The elder who coined the term Two-Spirit was Myra Laramie.
Thank you.
Miigwech.
Question up front here. Don't worry, we'll bring the mic to you.
From with the knowledge you know now and your experience, what would you tell your past closeted self, or is there I know a big thing is marriage now is that's a big thing, or what from now surprised you, if you're looking back from the past, what, I don't know if it makes sense, but what advice would you tell yourself now? Or just what, I'm not too sure.
That's a great question. Thank you so much. I think I would tell myself, oh, get ready, have fun, enjoy the moment, because there's so much great stuff coming. Just you wait. You're gonna have a great time, and also maybe not great time in moments, but there's so much cool stuff out there and so many cool people you're gonna meet, and yeah, just get ready. And I think that also makes me think of the cool stuff in the future too. So yeah, that's a really good question. Lessons, that's a really, yeah, I think just you never stop kind of learning about yourself, and it's an ongoing process. So I as much as saying don't stress about it is sort of of course you're gonna stress about it, it's gonna happen the way it's gonna happen. You're gonna grow and you're gonna learn from everything that's coming toward you. That's what I would tell myself.
For me, I would just you're okay. You'll be fine in the sense of you're on the right path. You're gonna figure things out. Don't worry about it. And there's people around you, and there's love, and there's some support, and there's gonna be some shitty times, but you'll be fine. And to do it all over again, I'd probably do exactly the same way I just did it. I wouldn't change a thing because I've learned so much on the way. So, The struggles were real, they were dark, but I appreciate them. I've learned from them, and I wouldn't change them.
I concur. I think that these are very similar things that I would tell my younger self, like, you are okay and you will be okay. I would emphasize too, listen to that little voice in the back of your head. Don't suppress it because it doesn't fit with the world around you. Listen to it. That little voice is you. That little voice is you.
Thank you. You're going to live, you're going to laugh, you're going to cry. And most importantly, ask the cute girl in history out because she likes you back. Any other questions?
Is this on? Yeah. I actually just wanted to answer that question as well. Just for context, I grew up in Thunder Bay, and so I live in Toronto now, but about coming out, I feel like when I was younger, I thought coming out was such an important milestone. And as I've grown older and I've met so many other people, especially people of color from varying backgrounds, I've learned that coming out isn't everything. And you can decide to just not come out to certain family members, and you are still completely valid in your queer and trans identity. And I think that's something that's very important to talk about, how, coming out is a very white concept. And it doesn't resonate for a lot of people of color. And so, yeah, just know that even if your grandma doesn't know you're queer, sometimes, she doesn't need to. And you can still live a very beautiful life. And I also would hold that in meeting other people that, say, oh, I could never come out to my parents. And to not judge them for that. But yeah, I feel like that's something very important that I wish I learned much younger. Because yeah, I think when I first started coming out to my peers when I was in 9th grade, a lot of people were like, you should just come out, you'll feel so much better. But it was different because I'm from a Muslim, Pakistani, Indian family. And so my experience was vastly different growing up in Thunder Bay to the other queer kids. But yeah, that's me.
I think that's a really good point. I think that's a great one. Yeah. I also totally resonate with the idea of you don't have to explain yourself to anyone, and you are queer enough, and you do deserve to be there and take up space. I think that's something that a lot I would have told my younger self too. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that was an excellent point, Bisma. Any other questions? Way over here.
Yeah, I like the concept that coming out is a white thing. I was actually having a conversation with one of our staff here, who she talked about having to come out over and over again. So the idea that when you come out, you feel better, maybe in the moment, but she comes out every semester to her class because she does not present as a gay woman. And at some point throughout the semester, inevitably she'll refer to her wife, and then there's a hush over the class. And so you're not just coming out once, and I've experienced this as well. We come out over and over and over again. So it's not necessarily one thing that we do one time and then the whole world knows that we're queer. This is something that we might be presented with over and over, and as Gaston said, with experience, with life experience, things tend to get easier. But my question is, when we're thinking about generations, there was a really clear disconnect from when Gaston was talking about his generation. He mentioned the no cell phones in the bars in the 90s. And then with Alexie and Sophie being part of a generation that within it has micro generations because of how quickly technology is advancing, that's a big difference from where Gaston comes from and from where the two of you are coming from. No offense, Gaston. But what challenges are we seeing with youth today that we didn't see with Gaston and that you didn't see in your time even just 10 years ago, Alexie and Sophie. But for all three of you, what challenges are you seeing with youth today that are completely new, maybe unique to this generation that we might be seeing coming up in the college in a few years?
I think that's a really good question. I think Pride Central, which is where I've done a lot of my work, is this little hallway in the basement of the university, tucked away, like you would not know where it is. And you walk inside and it's so colorful, but it's so covert, and it was there like that for a reason. It's been around for decades, covert and private and safe. And I think recognizing there is a reason that closed spaces exist is because it makes it safe for people, and that's been a big reality of the past. So we always want to make things accessible and open them, but also recognizing that when you open a space, it can become less safe. So we need to kind of understand that sometimes too. Something we did was we made a Discord server, and that's been really cool to see people connect and share resources and say, I'm going to this bar, is anyone else going? I'm going to this event. So you kind of feel less alone, and I think there's a really good thing about that. But then also saying, there's no replacement for in-person connection and community. We need to be there for each other in person, and we can't. I think sometimes there is a danger of being online and isolated, and if that's your only source of community, I think that is valid to say, like, sometimes it's hard to find it, and online can definitely be a important place to feel seen, but also recognizing that, like, it's also important to meet people in person as well, and get that, like, face-to-face connection. Yeah, I don't know what else I would say other than that, but it's a really great question. I think we're going to continue to see the changes and the impacts on people. We're still seeing the effects, I think, of all the rise in technology on queer youth specifically.
I've heard a lot of anecdotes where a lot of kids in high school and primary school today are the popular kids are the ones who are accepting and welcoming of these different identities. If you are somebody who discriminates in high school and primary school, a lot of the times you are ostracized, but that's not true in every community. One big challenge that I see nowadays for youth that are queer, that are growing up, is that they are being pinned between like this culture war that is happening right now in the world. You have a lot of these conservatives that are talking about talking about children and frankly sexualizing them, and we should not be sexualizing children, period. And yet they're talking about trans children or queer children and saying that they're being brainwashed by their parents, or they're saying that they're being brainwashed by their friends at school or by their professors at school. And so a lot of these people are saying that we need to prevent these kids from being exposed to this degeneracy under the guise of parental rights. Well, what about the rights of these children that are growing up, right? You see a lot right now, conservatism is becoming a younger movement, which I find is very worrying. If you look at, like just here in the election here in Canada, Liberals usually get the support of older people, whereas Conservatives are getting the support of younger people, and usually younger men. And I think that that's a very significant and very sharp change in how the political world has changed in the past decade. And so that's a big challenge that I see, is that kids are being put into this culture war. And another challenge too is with, like when I was going through high school, we were talking about cyberbullying, but I didn't really see any cyberbullying. But nowadays with Snapchat, with phones, with Instagram.
Swatting.
Yeah, swatting, that's a great example. Yeah, where for those who don't know, swatting is when your personal information, like your home address and your telephone number, is put online for everyone to see.
Or they call the police
that's
and report a crime, and the police show up, or the SWAT team shows up at your house. And obviously that can have very terrible consequences for people of color.
Exactly. And what I described was doxing. Swatting is right when somebody calls police on you. And yeah, cyberbullying, where pictures are being shared by and large. Like right now I'm doing a placement in child welfare, and there is a lot of pictures that are being shown and videos that are being shown of children to the workers in the office, and so that's very worrying that
technology is right now being used and co-opted to as a weapon of this culture war.
Yeah, I also something that makes me think of that would come up a lot in our peer support sessions is the idea of like, how amazing is it that we have access to education online? You can Google, information and get facts, and that can make you understand your identity better. And that's something that hasn't been around always. Like, what does bisexual mean? You can kind of look on the YouthLine for resources about education and stuff like that. But also, there's what I've heard from people that I talk to, youth and other community members, is the pressure sometimes to feel like you find a label that is perfect for you and you fit, and that's the one, and it never changes. And then talking to people about like, oh, maybe it's okay if I don't have a label and I don't know exactly and I'm questioning forever, and that's fine. So I think sometimes the amount of information we have access to can be very overwhelming and pressure people to feel like they need to know and have all the answers. And the in-person sessions, we would talk and support each other and be like, oh, we all feel this way. And maybe it's okay if I don't even need to label myself, or I don't have to worry about how I feel about my gender identity, or what that looks like for me right now, because that can definitely be really stressful. And I think there's so much stress already youth face. You definitely don't need any more of it.
For sure. Thank you both. Gaston, is there anything you'd like to add?
Make a quick little point. Like, I actually love technology. I think there's a place for it. I think it's amazing that kids get to connect with it, because I think if you live in rural, you might not have the opportunity to connect with other queer youth. So I think that's a great thing. The apps that are out there are amazing. Yes, you need to be safe. We all know that. But yes, there is there's a difference between going to a bar today versus I went to Ottawa 2 weeks ago. My friend brought me to the Lookout. It was just, they're 20, 25, 30 years old, which is great. It's a great bar. But there was no interaction, right? Because I was the senior citizen that walked in, which I'm okay. I'm going to own that. But I was kind of, do you want to go to a really divey bar, like a divey, queer, gay bar? I'm like, okay. He's like, yeah, it's just like for old gays. Great, I'll go. That was the most beautiful thing, because it started off with us being the old ones, like just talking and drinking, and then it got younger and younger and younger, in a sense of like there was that intergenerational link, and I think people are recognizing that, and they want to have that social. They want to talk to other people, and they're recognizing the fact that this is fun. On my phone I can chat with you, but that personal one-on-one is great. And I think there's going to be the Discord that's now, it's changing. I think people are realizing like it's kind of fun to go out and actually meet new people and talk to people. So I saw that in that bar. Maybe I felt like I was back in 1984, but it was still like a beautiful thing to see your 19, your 30-year-olds, your 40-year-olds, everyone together and just kind of enjoying themselves and talking. So I think technology is a great thing. I would not shut it down. I think it has a place.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. YouthLine wouldn't exist without technology, so we're fans. Obviously, you have to be careful about misinformation. I think it's important to fact check. AI is everywhere. AI is not always right. All of that stuff. We are coming up to the close of our Q&A period and the end of the panel now. And I would just like to say thank you to the Cambrian College Equity Center and all of the staff, especially Gaston, who has been ever so helpful in finding us the E-Dome and then also coming in to save the day as a panelist. I also want to thank our wonderful panelists, Alexie and Sophie, for taking the time to come here and participate with us and share space in their journeys. And huge thanks to the caterer. The food is delicious. If you haven't had any, go get some. If you have had some, get more. And last but not least, thank you to everyone for coming out and helping to support and celebrate LGBT YouthLine in our 30 years. Feel free to hang out until 4. It's in 10 minutes. To enjoy food, mingle around, and learn more. Maybe take some pictures in front of our lovely backdrop over there. Come up one-on-one, ask questions. That's cool too. I can almost do it with the left hand.